Hi, let's continue. If you're new here, you can go to the trailer, and if you're lost, you could go to the table of contents. Thanks for coming. Let's have a look at the antipsychotics. Kind of a misnomer, actually, because they're used all the way across the mood spectrum, not just for psychosis. Overall, it's good to have them when you really need them, but they're used when they're not needed, I think. And I'm going to offer you my opinions here, which go against several of the published guidelines. In fact, most of them. And I'll show you later why I go against those guidelines. I have a whole video about that I'll link at the end. So I've seen a lot of antipsychotics across my practice lifetime of about 40 years. I'm going to focus on this group, but I'll introduce all of them quickly first. This is the original, the generic name, and then the original manufacturer's trade name. Haloperidol, the main old one, is still used sometimes, not many of the others. Then came clozapine, which was really quite a miracle because it worked much better than the ones that had preceded it, but it very quickly became clear that it caused weight gain and physiologic metabolic consequences of weight gain big time and very quickly, very concerning. So the Green Gang was largely an attempt to get the clozapine effects without the weight gain, but only ziprasidone, it turned out, really didn't have weight gain, and it has too many other problems, so it's hardly ever used. So the search actually is still on for the clozapine-like effects without the weight and metabolic consequences, which has led us to the next set of generations. Lurasidone is the first of that next generation to go generic, meaning it can be had much more cheaply than when it's just a trade name. And then the rest of these red guys are still under patent, which means they're dominated by advertising, a lot of money being thrown around, and they're just now entering some of the treatment guidelines. CAR XT is the newest. It has a completely different mechanism than everything that preceded it. It's very exciting in that respect, and it's so new, we won't really know what the downsides, the long-term risks are for years. Um, but if someone was desperate at this stage, having been through a lot of those other things, it could be considered even now. So I'm going to focus on this group again. When they're really needed, they're good to have. And then I'm going to sound pretty negative about them for three reasons. First, because of weight gain and this metabolic syndrome that goes with it. Weight gain, cholesterol increases, body fat increases, and blood pressure increases, and heading toward diabetes if it's allowed to continue and progress. The second reason I'm very concerned about these medications is something called tardive dyskinesia. You've probably heard of it. A disfiguring movement disorder that comes on after people have been taking one of these antipsychotics for quite some time. So for people who are kind of getting on them to stay on them, this becomes a significant risk. The most recent reference I could find, one person in 40. They have side effects that make most people, in my experience, not want to take them unless the relief from the psychosis is really substantial, which it can be. Um, and so just feeling the medication on board all the time is a problem. When I started using lamotrigine, people would come back and say, is it doing anything? I don't feel like I'm on anything. Well, that's kind of the point. You don't want to feel like you're on something all the time. And that's the problem with these medications, nearly all of them, nearly all the time. So just across the mood spectrum, let's take a look at where, starting with treatment of mania. Um, they're strong, they're fast, they're used in the hospital because of that. But in the guidelines, lithium, full dose lithium, as opposed to low dose lithium, which I've explained elsewhere, full dose lithium is the recommended treatment number one amongst the guidelines for the treatment of manic depressive illness. But it doesn't get started. Instead, these other ones get started because they're so much faster and easier to start. in the hospital, it might be that someone would start both, or when one, for one reason or another, is not in so much of a hurry to get symptoms under control. So when things are slower, then it could be lithium, and then there's a couple of other candidates that are mood stabilizers that have anti-manic effects, valproate, which comes in the form of divalproex, um, and carbamazepine. And then in kids, for an anti-manic effect, oxcarbazepine is often used because it doesn't require, at least initially, blood testing. So oxcarbazepine, separate video on that here as well. So they're used at the depression end of the mood spectrum for people who got on an antidepressant and got partial improvement. So they're used as an add-on, which kind of amazes me because even though they're in the guidelines like this, these are the ones that are in the current guidelines, there are all these other alternatives. They're harder, some of them to pursue, than just adding another pill. But we have lots of them. And obviously, you can tell, in my opinion, many of these, maybe most of them, perhaps all of them, ought to precede the add-on of an antipsychotic to an antidepressant. In the realm of bipolar 2, the not fully manic version of bipolar disorders, that whole region in the orange there, these are the recommendations and the guidelines. Whereas if you've encountered them so far, I have videos on lamotrigine and low-dose lithium. I think that's what I would be using in this region, and those videos explain why, and this is where I differ from those guidelines. And that's why I have that separate video about why I don't go with the guidelines, which I'm going to link all three of these videos at the end of this one. For mixed states, which in the middle of mixed depression, there's a whole playlist about that on this, where am I, on this YouTube channel. But antipsychotics are often used here as well. The current treatment guidelines include only these because study of this region of the mood spectrum is really just getting underway. So these are the only ones that have been really studied in randomized trials, and that's where those treatment guidelines come from, as you'll see in that other video if you look at it, the guidelines video. So I think that this region of the mood spectrum ought to be treated with lamotrigine and low-dose lithium most of the time. But in the guidelines, they are listed as third line or less, like not listed because of insufficient evidence, which is a function of the fact that they've been generic for years, and so there's no money to study them. So ironic, and again, that's why, as you can see, I have a difference of opinion. Now, an antidepressant, when used in the middle of this mood spectrum, can cause or exacerbate a mixed depression. So, first treatment step, when possible, is to just taper the antidepressant. Usually, we end up having to add on something else in the process because these symptoms can be really, really awful. But obviously, one of the treatment steps would be tapering the antidepressant. And there's a separate video on antidepressant tapering, which I think is particularly important in this region of the mood spectrum. So in summary, these antipsychotics are used commonly. They're used across the mood spectrum. And I hope you understand that I have a difference of opinion about when they should be used. And if you want to see more about that, here are some further videos that will help you understand. The video about why I don't follow the guidelines, the video about lamotrigine, and the video about low-dose lithium. Thanks for watching.